In that town forgotten by time, she was just a body to be ridiculed, a burden to be locked away. Obese, silent, invisible, until the day they caged her like an animal, accused of dishonoring her own people. But no one imagined that on that very night, he would come. An Apache with eyes black as night, wild as the desert, ready to take her from her chains and make her his bride. What begins as a rescue transforms into a forbidden escape, charged with desire, secrets, and a passion capable of setting everything around them ablaze. If intense and unexpected love stories like this touch your heart, subscribe to the channel and comment what you thought. Every day we post new plots that move and surprise. Discover now the romance no one dared to live. In the heart of the Montana plains, where the sun punishes without mercy and nights arrive with the cutting cold of solitude, Lydia's life had always been a journey of silences and humiliations. At 20 years old, prisoner of a body that the town of Clear Springs despised and of a family that treated her like dead weight, she had learned to exist in the shadows, invisible to everyone, including herself. Shame had impregnated her skin in the abundant flesh that others pointed at with disdain, in the silent way her mother averted her eyes whenever she dared to dream of something beyond those dirt roads. Daughter of a bankrupt merchant and a woman embittered by shattered dreams, Lydia grew up hearing that she was too different to deserve the same as the other young women in town. While her former school classmates married and received embroidered dresses, she stayed behind the counter of her father's store, serving the same men who looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. Her mother, Mrs. Constance, sighed every time someone asked about her daughter's plans, and her father, Mr. Theodore, changed the subject as if Lydia were a topic too delicate to be discussed aloud. But not even all this forced resignation prepared her for the public humiliation that would come on a suffocating March afternoon, when the wind carried the dry smell of dust and the irritating buzz of cicadas. Lydia had been seen on the roadside, near the entrance to Santa Clara Ranch, watching the ranch hands who worked on the fence. For the town, that was sufficient proof that she was offering herself to outsiders, bringing dishonor to the family and scandal to Clear Springs. The news spread like wildfire in dry grass. Mrs. Grace, the mayor's wife, personally went to the store to confront Mr. Theodore with 3 other church ladies at her side, all with crossed arms and expressions of final judgment. "This girl needs correction," she said, her voice full of false concern. "She can't be wandering around insinuating herself to just anyone. This is no example for the decent young ladies of our town." Lydia, who was reorganizing sugar sacks in the back storage room, heard everything. She felt heat rise up her neck, her hands trembling with rage and humiliation. She had done nothing more than stop to rest in the shade of a tree during her daily walk to church, but that didn't matter. For them, her mere presence was already an affront, a provocation that needed to be punished. Her father, red with shame, didn't defend her. He only muttered apologies and promised he would handle the situation. Her mother, when the ladies left, looked at Lydia with an expression of infinite weariness. "You can't make it so easy for them," she said, her voice broken. "Isn't it enough being the way you are? Now you're going to give them reason to talk?" That night, locked in her small, stuffy room, Lydia felt something break inside her. The rage she had been swallowing for years finally overflowed. A muffled revolt against everyone who made her feel like a mistake of nature, a burden that deserved to hide forever. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror that sat on the dresser and, for the first time, refused to lower her eyes. She saw a woman with generous curves, thick, wavy brown hair, green eyes that shone with an intensity that no one had ever bothered to notice. She wasn't ugly. She was just different from the standard that this petty town demanded. The next day, determined to no longer hide, Lydia went out for her usual walk. But this time, instead of avoiding the main road, she deliberately walked down the central street, greeting with waves the people who looked at her with surprise and disapproval. When she reached the roadside that led to neighboring ranches, she stopped at the same tree as always and sat in the shade, pretending not to see the whispers of passers-by. It was then that she saw the pickup truck approaching, raising a cloud of red dust. The vehicle slowed down as it passed her, and through the dusty windshield, Lydia glimpsed the face of a man who watched her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. He had sunburnt brown skin, black hair a little too long for the town's standards, and something in his eyes that she couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, it wasn't contempt. It was something more dangerous, genuine interest. The pickup stopped a few meters ahead, and the man got out with confident and deliberate movements. He wore a work shirt that marked the muscles of his shoulders, worn boots of someone who knew the land, and had in his hands the type of calluses that only came from years dealing with cattle and fences. When he approached, Lydia felt her heart accelerate in a way she had never experienced. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice deep and calm. "Are you all right? Do you need a ride somewhere?" Lydia hesitated, surprised by the direct courtesy, without the judgment-filled roundabout she was accustomed to. No, thank you, I'm just resting." He came a little closer, and she could see he had dark brown eyes, almost black, that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. "You're from town?" he asked, but there was something in the way he said it that suggested he already knew the answer. "I am." "Lydia Sanders," she replied, lifting her chin in a gesture of defiance she didn't know where it came from. "Chayton Morrison," he said, extending his hand. "I work at Santa Clara." The name was uncommon, and when she shook his hand, she felt his rough, warm skin envelop hers with a firmness that made her tremble. There was something about him that was different from the men in town, a kind of silent strength, like a wild animal that learned to live among humans without ever really being domesticated. "Chayton is an Indian name, isn't it?" she asked, curious. He smiled for the first time, a crooked smile that completely transformed his face. "My grandmother was from the Lakota people. My grandfather brought her here a long time ago." The name means falcon in her language. Lydia felt something stir in her chest. There was a story there, secrets she wanted to discover. But before she could ask anything else, she heard the sound of voices approaching. Mr. Joe Anderson and two other men were coming down the road, probably returning from the neighboring ranch, and their expressions became hostile when they saw Lydia talking to Chayton. "Lydia Sanders!" shouted Mr. Joe Anderson, quickening his pace. "What are you doing here? Your mother is looking for you." Chayton immediately perceived the tension. His eyes hardened, and he subtly positioned himself between Lydia and the approaching men. "Any problem?" he asked, his voice still calm, but with a new coldness. "The problem is this girl who doesn't know her place," grumbled Mr. Joe Anderson, looking at Chayton with suspicion. "You're not from here. You don't know the family. Better not get involved." Lydia felt her blood boil. "I can talk to whoever I want," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "I'm not doing anything wrong." "You're not doing anything wrong?" laughed one of the men with scorn. "You're here offering yourself to any ranch hand who passes by, bringing disgrace to your family." It was when Chayton stepped forward, and something in his posture made the three men instinctively back away. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make threatening gestures, but there was a primitive authority emanating from him that made the air heavy. "The lady wasn't offering herself to anyone," he said, each word pronounced with dangerous calm. "She was just resting in the shade, and any man of respect should treat a lady with education, not with insults." Mr. Joe Anderson opened his mouth to respond, but something in Chayton's eyes made him think better. Instead, he grabbed Lydia's arm with unnecessary force. "Come on, girl, your mother is waiting." Lydia tried to break free, but the grip got tighter. It was when she felt Chayton's hand gently land on her shoulder. "Do you want to go with them?" he asked quietly, and there was something in the question that sounded like a promise, that if she said no, he would do something about it. For a moment, Lydia seriously considered saying no. There was something about this man that made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced, but she knew this would only bring more problems for everyone. Reluctantly, she nodded her head. "All right," she said, but her eyes met his for an instant, and she saw there a silent promise that this wouldn't end like this. As she walked back to town between the three men, Lydia felt her heart beating out of rhythm. When she looked back, she saw Chayton standing where she had left him, watching her walk away with an unreadable expression. And for the first time in her life, she felt that someone had really seen her, not as a problem to be solved or an error to be hidden, but as a real woman. That night, lying in her narrow bed while listening to her parents' worried whispers on the other side of the thin wall, Lydia couldn't get Chayton out of her head. The way he had said her name, the way he had defended her without even knowing her, the silent promise she had seen in his eyes. There was something wild about him, something that recognized the wildness she herself had spent her life trying to domesticate. And when sleep finally came, it was filled with dreams of eyes dark as the Montana night, and hands that touched her with a fierce tenderness she didn't even know existed. The following days passed like slow torture for Lydia. Every morning, when she opened her eyes in the stuffy room, the first thing that came to her mind was Chaitin's face, the way he had looked at her as if she were the most important thing in the world at that moment. Her parents, haunted by what they considered almost a scandal, kept her practically under house arrest, only allowing her to leave to go to church on Sundays, always accompanied by her vigilant mother, Mrs. Constance never stopped making speeches about reputation and a woman's place, while Mr. Theodore avoided looking directly at his daughter, as if her mere presence were a constant reminder of his own inability to control the family. The atmosphere at home had become heavy like the air before a storm, full of unspoken words and resentments that fermented in silence. But Lydia discovered that prohibition only intensified her obsession. At night, lying in bed, she touched her own lips, remembering the moment when Chaitin had approached, when she had felt his warmth envelop her like a promise. She imagined what it would be like if he kissed her, if those calloused hands traced her skin, if she finally knew what it was to be desired by a real man. It was on Saturday, a week after the encounter on the road, that everything changed. Lydia was hanging clothes in the yard when she heard the gate creak. She expected to see some gossipy neighbor, but when she turned around, she almost dropped the basin of wet clothes. Chaitin was there, standing at the entrance to the yard, wearing a light blue shirt that highlighted his skin color and dark pants that marked his muscular legs. He carried in his hand a worn leather hat and a determined expression that made her heart race. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice controlled but with an intensity she felt in her spine. "I came to speak with your father." Lydia looked nervously toward the house, where she knew her parents were doing the week's accounting in the kitchen. He won't like seeing you here," she whispered, approaching a few steps. "After what happened?" Chaitin studied her with those dark eyes that seemed to read her most intimate thoughts. "And you? Don't you like seeing me here?" The question caught her off guard. There was a brutal frankness in it, a demand for honesty that left her speechless for a moment. When she finally answered, her own voice surprised her with its firmness. "I do," she said, lifting her chin. "I like it very much." Something changed in his face at that instant. His eyes darkened even more, and she saw his fists close slightly at his side, as if he were fighting against a primitive impulse. "Then let me try to resolve this properly," he said, his voice hoarser. "Let me talk to him." Before Lydia could respond, Mr. Theodore's stern voice echoed from the kitchen door. "Who's there, Lydia?" And when he saw Chaitin, his expression hardened like stone. "You. What do you want in my house?" Chaitin straightened up, placing his hat respectfully over his heart. "Good afternoon, sir. I came to ask permission to speak with you about your daughter." "About my daughter?" Mr. Theodore descended the 3 steps that separated the kitchen from the yard with an expression of incredulity and indignation. "You have the nerve to show up here after the embarrassment you caused? Everyone in town is talking." "They're talking because they don't know the truth," Chaitin replied calmly. "Your daughter did nothing wrong. I saw her on the road, offered help because that's how I was raised, and some men thought they could insult her in front of me. I came here to clarify this and ask permission to court her as she deserves." The silence that followed was so heavy that Lydia could hear her own heart beating. Mrs. Constance appeared in the doorway, holding a dish towel with such force that her knuckles turned white. The word court echoed in the air like distant thunder. "Court?" repeated Mr. Theodore, his voice rising an octave. "You barely know the girl. And besides," he stopped, struggling to find words that wouldn't sound too prejudiced. "You're from different worlds. You work on a ranch. She's a merchant's daughter. This has no future." "With all due respect, sir," said Chaitin, and there was a dignity in his posture that made Lydia fall in love a little more. "I work as foreman at Santa Clara Ranch. I earn well, have my savings, and plan to have my own land soon. I can support a family." Lydia felt her legs tremble. He was talking about family, about future, about things she didn't even dare dream for herself. But her father shook his head vigorously. "No," he said firmly. I won't allow my daughter to get involved with someone we don't even know where he came from. You might be good people, but you're not for her." It was when Chaitin stepped forward and something in his eyes changed. It wasn't anger exactly, but something deeper and more dangerous. "You're judging me for having Indian blood," he said, his voice low but cutting like a blade. "Is that it?" Mr. Theodore turned red, clearly uncomfortable having his prejudices exposed so directly. "It's not that, it's that. It's exactly that," Chaitin interrupted. "But I'll tell you something, Mr. Sanders. My grandmother may have been Lakota, but she taught more about honor and respect in 1 week than many civilized men learn in a lifetime. And I will treat your daughter with more dignity than any of these town men who look at her as if she were a problem to be solved." Lydia felt tears sting her eyes. No one had ever defended her like this, with such ferocity and conviction. But before she could say anything, her father pointed to the gate. "Get off my property," he said, trembling with rage, "and don't come back. If I see you near my daughter again, I'll call the police." Chaitin looked at Lydia one last time, and she saw in that look a silent promise that this wouldn't end there. Then he put his hat on his head, nodded respectfully to Mrs. Constance, and left through the gate without saying another word. That night, the discussion at home was brutal. Mr. Theodore shouted about reputation and shame, while Mrs. Constance cried and talked about moving towns if necessary. Lydia, locked in her room, heard everything through the thin walls and felt a revolt growing inside her like a storm. When the house finally fell silent, she made a decision that surprised her with its audacity. She waited until she was sure her parents were sleeping, then dressed silently and left through her bedroom window, which faced the backyard. Her hands trembled as she walked through the deserted streets of Clear Springs, but her determination was stronger than fear. She knew Chaitin lived in a small house at the back of Santa Clara Ranch. She had heard gossip about it in town. The walk there took almost an hour, and when she arrived, her heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it from meters away. The house was simple but well maintained, with a small porch where she could see a hammock and some potted plants. A dim light came from inside, and she gathered all the courage she had to knock on the door. When Chaitin opened, wearing only jeans and with disheveled hair, the expression of surprise on his face was quickly replaced by something that made her tremble from head to toe. "Lydia," he said, his voice hoarse with sleep and surprise. "What are you doing here? It's dangerous to walk alone at night." "I needed to see you," she said, and only then realized how desperate she must seem. "My father, after you left." Chaitin pulled her into the house without ceremony, closing the door behind her. The environment was masculine but welcoming, with simple wooden furniture and some pieces of Native American crafts on the walls. But Lydia barely registered the details, because all her attention was focused on the man in front of her, on his bare chest that rose and fell rapidly, on the way he looked at her as if she were both a miracle and a provocation. "You can't be here," he said, but made no movement to take her back to the door. "If someone finds out—" "I don't care," she interrupted, and the strength in her own voice surprised her. "I'm tired of caring what others think. I'm tired of living as if I were a mistake that needs to hide." Chaitin studied her for a long moment, and she saw something break in his eyes. "You're not a mistake," he said, approaching one step. "You're the most beautiful thing that ever happened to this miserable town." The declaration hit her like lightning. No one had ever called her beautiful, much less with such conviction. When he raised his hand to touch her face, she leaned against the rough palm like a cat starved for affection. "Chaitin," she whispered, and his name on her lips seemed to break his last resistance. He kissed her then, not with the delicacy she expected from a first kiss, but with a desperate hunger that made her legs weak. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her head back to deepen the kiss, and she felt a wave of heat take over her entire body. When they separated, both were panting. "This is madness," he murmured against her lips. "Your father will kill me if he finds out." "Then don't let him find out," she said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Don't let anyone find out. But don't ask me to pretend this isn't happening." Chaitin pulled her against his chest, and she felt the heat of his skin through her thin blouse. "You don't know what you're getting into," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm not a civilized man like the ones in your town. When I want something, I fight for it." And I want you, Lydia. I want you in a way that should shame me." His words sent an electric current straight to the center of her body. "Then have me," she whispered against his chest, feeling the muscles tense under her lips. It was when he gently but firmly pushed her away. "Not like this," he said, and there was a fierce tenderness in his voice. "Not in hiding, as if it were something dirty. You deserve more than that." Lydia felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they weren't from humiliation or sadness. It was a new, powerful emotion that took her time to recognize as hope. "And how do you suggest we do this?" "My father will never accept." Chaitan smiled, that crooked smile that transformed his entire face. "Leave that to me," he said. "I have some plans, but it will require patience." "I don't know if I have much patience," she admitted, and he laughed softly. "Then we'll have to work on that too." He accompanied her back to the edge of town, maintaining enough distance not to be seen together, but close enough for her to feel protected. When they said goodbye at the corner near her house, he held her hand for a moment that seemed eternal. "Trust me," he said, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss on the knuckles. "This won't end here." And as Lydia returned home on tiptoe, her heart still racing and her lips still tingling from the kiss, she knew she had already passed the point of no return. Whatever Chaitan's plan was, she was willing to follow him to the end of the world. The days following the encounter at Chaitan's house passed like a feverish haze for Lydia. Every morning she woke up with the taste of him still on her lips. Every night she slept hugging her pillow, pretending it was his arms around her. Her parents, oblivious to the storm happening in their daughter's heart, maintained rigorous vigilance, but there was something different in the air, an electricity that even they couldn't completely ignore. It was on Wednesday of the following week that the first sign of Chaitan's plan manifested. Mrs. Constance returned from the market with a confused expression, holding a basket of wildflowers that someone had left at the store door with a simple note. "For the Sanders family, with respect and admiration." "Who could have sent this?" she murmured, smelling the yellow and purple flowers that only grew by the creek beds, far from town. "There's no name, but they're too pretty to throw away." Lydia knew exactly who had left those flowers, and her heart raced when she recognized the firm handwriting on the note. Chaitan was sending a message. He hadn't given up. The next day, it was Mr. Theodore's turn to return from the store with intriguing news. "A man showed up there today," he said during dinner, absent-mindedly stirring his beans. "A well-dressed fellow, said he represents a group of investors from Denver. Wants to know if I'm interested in selling the store." "Selling?" exclaimed Mrs. Constance, almost knocking over her glass. "But why? The store is doing well." "No, it's not," sighed Mr. Theodore. "You know it's not. With the new supermarket that opened in town, I'm losing customers every month." The man offered a fair price. Said he wants to turn the place into a hardware store. Lydia listened to the conversation with growing suspicion. Investors from Denver interested in her father's little store? That had Chaitan's fingerprints all over it, but she couldn't understand what his plan was. The answer came on Saturday, when she finally managed to escape her parents' vigilance to go to the pharmacy to get medicine for Mrs. Constance's headache. She had arranged a signal with Chaitan. If she needed to see him, she would leave a white flower in her bedroom window. If he needed her, he would leave a small, smooth stone at the base of the tree where they first met. The stone was there, and Lydia picked it up with trembling hands before heading to the meeting place they had arranged. An abandoned chapel 2 miles from town, hidden among eucalyptus and oak trees. The place was perfect for secret meetings, isolated enough not to be discovered, but still within limits a respectable young lady could justify if questioned. When she arrived, Chaitan was already waiting, leaning against the peeling wall of the chapel with his arms crossed. He wore a white shirt that contrasted with his brown skin and a serious expression that made her stop a few meters away. "You sent flowers to my mother," she said, more as a statement than a question. He smiled, but there was something tense in the smile. "I'm trying to win over your family gradually, starting with the easier part." "And the investor who showed up at my father's store?" "That's me," he admitted, moving away from the wall to walk toward her. "Or rather, it's a friend of mine from Denver who's helping me. I have enough savings to buy your father's store and still have money left for other things." Lydia stared at him with a mixture of admiration and incredulity. "You're going to buy my father's store?" "But why?" Chayton stopped right in front of her, so close she could smell the scent of soap and clean sweat emanating from his skin. "Because if I'm his boss, he'll have to respect me. And because I want your family to have financial security when you marry me." The declaration hit her like a punch to the stomach. "When I marry you," she repeated, her voice coming out higher than normal. "You haven't even asked me to marry you yet." "I'm asking now," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Marry me, Lydia." She stared at him for a long moment, looking for signs that he was joking, but all she saw was an iron determination that made her tremble. "You're crazy," she whispered. "My parents will never accept." "Your parents will accept when they understand it's this or lose their daughter forever," he said with a calm that didn't hide the implicit threat. "Because I won't give up on you, Lydia. And if they keep rejecting me, I'll ask you to run away with me." The idea of running away with Chayton sent a wave of terror and excitement through her body. It was exactly the kind of romantic madness she secretly dreamed of, but never imagined someone would be capable of proposing in real life. "And where would we run?" she asked, surprised to find herself seriously considering the idea. "I have a cousin who lives on a ranch in Wyoming. Big place, isolated, where we could start over without anyone to judge us. But I'd prefer it not be necessary," he said, extending his hand to touch her face. "I'd prefer to win over your family and have you with me the right way." Lydia leaned against his palm, closing her eyes to absorb the heat radiating from his skin. "You talk like it's easy," she murmured. "Nothing worthwhile is easy," he replied, sliding his thumb over her lips. "But some things are worth any sacrifice." It was when she opened her eyes and saw something different in his expression, a shadow that wasn't there before. "What is it?" she asked, instinctively recognizing that there was something he wasn't saying. Chayton hesitated for a moment, then sighed and stepped back a few steps, running his hand through his hair in a rare display of nervousness. "There's something you need to know about me," he said, avoiding looking directly at her. "About my past." Lydia's heart accelerated, but not with fear. She had been waiting for this moment, knew that a man like Chayton had secrets, stories that explained the fierce intensity that radiated from him. "Tell me," she said simply. He turned to look at her, and she saw a vulnerability in his eyes that made her want to go to him and hug him. "I was married before," he said, the words coming out as if each one were a piece of glass cutting his throat. Lydia felt the world spin slightly, but it wasn't the shock she expected to feel. There was something in the way he said it that suggested the story was more complicated than a common separation. "What happened?" she asked softly. "I met Sarah when I was 22, he began, walking to one of the chapel walls and leaning against it. "She was the daughter of a wealthy rancher from Colorado, but she had Indian blood like me. We fell madly in love, the kind of love you think will burn down the whole world." Lydia felt a stab of irrational jealousy, but forced herself to stay quiet and let him tell. "Her father hated me for being just a ranch hand, but she ran away with me anyway. We came here, to the Clear Springs region, and I got work at Santa Clara. We were happy." He stopped, and Lydia saw his fists clench. "For 2 years we were happy. What happened to her?" Lydia asked, though something inside her already knew the answer would be terrible. "Pneumonia," he said, his voice almost inaudible. "A pneumonia that started as a simple cold and worsened in a matter of days. There wasn't a good doctor in the region at that time, and when we managed to get her to Denver, it was too late." Lydia felt tears sting her eyes. "How long ago?" 3 years, he replied, finally looking at her again. 3 years that I convinced myself I would never feel anything for anyone again. 3 years that I lived like a ghost, working, eating, sleeping, but not really being alive." He approached her again, and there was a desperate intensity in his eyes. Until I saw you at that tree, being humiliated by men who aren't worth the ground you walk on, and felt something wake up inside me again." Lydia extended her hand and touched his chest, feeling his heart accelerate under her palm. "Do you still love her?" she asked, and the question came out with more strength than she expected. "I'll always love her memory," he said honestly, covering her hand with his. "But what I feel for you is different. It's wilder, more desperate. With Sarah, I was a young man learning to love. With you, I'm a man who knows what he can lose, and that makes me want to fight more fiercely for you." The declaration hit her like a wave, and she felt something release inside her, a last resistance she didn't know she was still holding. "I accept," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "Accept what?" he asked, frowning. "Marrying you, running away with you if necessary. Anything, as long as it's with you." For a moment, Chayton seemed not to believe what he had heard. Then, in a sudden movement, he pulled her against him and kissed her with a passion that left her dizzy. It was different from the first kiss, more urgent, more possessive, as if he were trying to imprint his mark on her forever. When they separated, both were panting. "Are you sure?" he asked, studying her face as if looking for signs of doubt. "I am," she replied, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely certain of something. "But how are we going to do this?" "Let me take care of the details," he said, kissing her forehead with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. "Your father will receive an official purchase offer for the store next week. When he accepts, I'll go back there, this time as a respectable businessman, and ask for your hand the traditional way. And if he still refuses?" Chayton smiled, but there was something predatory in the smile. "Then we go to plan B." They spent another hour at the chapel, planning and dreaming, and when they finally separated, Lydia felt like a completely different woman. There was something powerful about being desired with such intensity, about being the center of a man like Chayton's plans and dreams. But as she walked back home, a shadow of worry hung over her happiness. There was something in Chayton's eyes when he had spoken about his dead wife, a pain that went beyond normal longing. And there was something in the way he had spoken about fighting fiercely for her that made her wonder exactly how far he would be willing to go to have her. That night, lying in her narrow bed while the house slept around her, Lydia touched her own lips and remembered his taste. Tomorrow, she thought, her real life would begin. Whatever the price, she was willing to pay it. But if she had known what the next days would bring, she might have hesitated a little more before surrendering her heart so completely to a man who carried so many secrets in the shadows of his soul. The official purchase offer arrived on a rainy Monday, delivered by a well-dressed lawyer from Denver, who treated Mr. Theodore with the kind of deference the merchant hadn't received in years. The offered amount was generous, almost double what the store was really worth, and came accompanied by a job proposal for Mr. Theodore as manager of the new establishment. Lydia watched her parents discuss the proposal in the kitchen, pretending to read a book while her ears caught every word. Mrs. Constance was excited about the possibility of financial security, but Mr. Theodore seemed suspicious of the offer's excessive generosity. "It's too much money," he muttered, rereading the papers for the 10th time. "Why would someone pay so much for a little store in the countryside?" "Maybe because they have big plans for the town," suggested Mrs. Constance hopefully. "They say there's going to be development here, with the new highway they're planning." Lydia hid a smile. Chayton had thought of everything, even a plausible justification for the high amount. During the next 3 days, she watched her father struggle with the decision, weighing financial need against the pride of keeping the family business. The final decision came from an unexpected source. On Thursday, Mr. Joe Anderson appeared at the store with a somber expression and an envelope in his hands. "Theodore," he said without ceremony, "I need to talk to you about your daughter." Lydia, who was organizing canned goods on the back shelf, froze. There was something in Mr. Joe Anderson's voice that foreboded trouble. "What about my daughter?" asked Mr. Theodore, tense. "She was seen leaving the house in the dead of night last week," said Mr. Joe Anderson, opening the envelope and taking out some grainy photographs. "And she was seen talking to that Indian at the old chapel." Lydia's blood froze. Someone had followed them, photographed them. When she managed to move, she peeked through the shelves and saw the photos in her father's hands. They were low quality, taken from afar, but clearly showed her and Chayton at the chapel, embracing. "Who took these photos?" asked Mr. Theodore, his voice trembling with rage and humiliation. "That doesn't matter," replied Mr. Joe Anderson. "What matters is that your daughter is bringing dishonor to the family and scandal to the town. Either you resolve this, or we will." "What do you mean you will resolve it?" Mr. Joe Anderson leaned forward, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. That Indian is going to disappear from this region one way or another, and your daughter is going to learn to behave like a family girl." Lydia felt blood rush to her head. They were threatening Chaitin, talking about making him disappear. Without thinking about the consequences, she came out from behind the shelf and marched to where the two men were talking. "Stop this!" she exclaimed, her hands trembling with rage. "You have no right to threaten anyone." Mr. Joe Anderson turned to her with an expression of disdain. "Look at that." The little whore decided to show up. The word hit Lydia like a slap, but instead of shrinking as she always did, she stood even taller. "I'm not a whore," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I'm an adult woman who has the right to choose who to talk to and who to relate to." "Lydia," roared Mr. Theodore, but she ignored him. "And you," she continued, facing Mr. Joe Anderson with a courage she didn't know she possessed, "are small, petty men who can't stand seeing someone different living in peace. Chaitin is worth more than 10 of you put together." The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Joe Anderson turned purple with indignation, and Mr. Theodore seemed to be having a heart attack. But Lydia felt strangely free, as if she had finally broken invisible chains that had bound her for years. "There," said Mr. Joe Anderson coldly. "Now you've seen the kind of daughter you raised. This can't continue, Theodore. If you don't resolve this by tomorrow, we will." After he left, father and daughter stared at each other in silence. Mr. Theodore was pale, his hands trembling as he held the photographs. "Have you completely lost your mind?" he whispered. "Do you know what you just did?" "I know," Lydia replied calmly. "I defended myself. For the first time in my life, I defended myself." "You defended yourself and condemned that man to death," said Mr. Theodore, and there was genuine pain in his voice. "They're not joking, Lydia. Joe Anderson has dangerous friends, people who don't hesitate to use violence." It was when the truth hit Lydia like lightning. She had put Chaitin in real, mortal danger. All her courage evaporated, replaced by an icy terror. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking, "you have to help me. Please." Mr. Theodore stared at her for a long moment, then sighed deeply and threw the photographs on the counter. "I'm going to accept the purchase offer," he said finally, "and I'm going to talk to this Chaitin. If he's really a man of character like he says he is, maybe we can resolve this in a way that doesn't end with someone dead." That afternoon, Lydia watched through the store window as her father left to meet Chaitin at Santa Clara Ranch. The hours dragged like centuries, each minute an eternity of anxiety and fear. When her father finally returned, it was already getting dark, and his expression was unreadable. "And then?" she asked, barely able to breathe. "We talked," he said simply. "He's different from what I thought. He has education, respect, and clearly loves you for real." Mr. Theodore stopped, running his hand over his tired face. "But this doesn't solve the immediate problem. Joe Anderson and the others won't stop just because I changed my mind. So what are we going to do?" "Chaitin has a plan," said her father, and there was something in his voice she couldn't identify. "But it will require courage from you, daughter. A lot of courage." The next morning, Lydia woke to the sound of horses in the street. When she looked out the window, she saw a group of 5 mounted men stopped in front of the store, all armed and with grim expressions. Mr. Joe Anderson was in front, talking in a low voice with the others. Her heart raced. They had come for Chaitin and probably didn't intend to just talk. She dressed quickly and went down to the store, where she found her parents whispering nervously. "They're waiting for him to show up," said Mrs. Constance, her hands trembling. "They said they know he comes here every morning." Lydia felt a cold rage take over her. "I won't let them," she said, heading for the door. "Lydia, no!" shouted her father, but she was already in the street. "Mr. Joe Anderson," she called, walking directly toward the group of armed men. "What do you want?" "We want that Indian," he replied, his hand resting on his gun handle. "And you're going to tell us where he is." "I won't," she said simply, "and you're not going to touch him." It was when she heard the sound of hooves approaching down the main street. Her heart almost stopped when she saw Chaitin appear at the corner, mounted on his black horse, coming directly toward the group. But he wasn't alone. Behind him rode 6 more men, all mounted on magnificent horses and wearing clothes that clearly weren't those of simple ranch hands. Chaitin stopped his horse a few meters from Mr. Joe Anderson's group And Lydia noticed he was wearing different clothes too, quality dark pants, an impeccable white shirt, and a leather jacket that gave him an air of authority she had never seen before. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but loaded with an authority that made all the men shift nervously in their saddles. "I heard you want to talk to me. We want you to leave this town and never come back," said Mr. Joe Anderson, but his voice no longer sounded as confident as before. Chayton smiled, that crooked smile Lydia knew well, but there was something different about it now. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," he said, taking some papers from his jacket pocket. "You see, I just became owner of the Sanders store, 3 commercial lots on Main Street, and a 1,000-acre ranch on the outskirts of town. Let's say I now have a vested interest in staying." The silence that followed was absolute. Lydia felt her mouth open in amazement, as did all the other people on the street who had come out to watch the confrontation. "Furthermore," continued Chayton, putting away the papers and gesturing to the men behind him, "I'd like to introduce my partners. This is Dr. Rodriguez Morrison, my cousin, public prosecutor from Denver. This is Colonel Smith, not related to the family, commander of the state police for the region. And these are Detectives Johnson and Williams." Lydia saw Mr. Joe Anderson visibly pale. The men who had come with him looked at each other with growing nervousness. "Now," said Chayton, dismounting with fluid movements, "if there are any formal accusations you'd like to make against me or against Miss Sanders, I ask that you make them in the presence of the competent authorities. Otherwise, I suggest you withdraw." Dr. Rodriguez, a tall and elegant man who clearly shared some family traits with Chayton, stepped forward. "Actually," he said, his voice educated but cold, "we've been receiving some complaints about intimidation and threats against peaceful citizens in this town. Perhaps this would be a good opportunity to clarify these issues." It was when Mr. Joe Anderson realized that the situation had completely escaped his control. He muttered something about misunderstanding and bad joke, and in less than 5 minutes, he and his accomplices had disappeared down the street, leaving only a cloud of dust behind. Chayton turned to Lydia, and she saw in his eyes a mixture of tenderness and triumph that made her tremble. "Miss Sanders," he said formally, but with a mischievous gleam in his eyes, "I'd like to speak with your father about a matter of extreme importance." 2 hours later, sitting in the Sanders living room, with the authorities serving as witnesses and the whole town whispering outside, Chayton officially made the marriage proposal that would change Lydia's life forever. "Mr. Sanders," he said, holding Lydia's hand while addressing her father, "I respectfully ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. I can support her, protect her, and I promise to love her every day of my life." Mr. Theodore, still stunned by the revelation that the simple ranch hand was actually a prosperous businessman with powerful connections, could only nod his head. And so it was that 3 months later, in a ceremony that brought together the entire region and became local legend, Lydia Sanders became Lydia Morrison, wife of the man who revolutionized not only her life, but the entire dynamics of the town of Clear Springs. On their wedding night, lying in the bed of the ranch that was now theirs, Chayton traced with his fingers the face of the woman he had chosen to be his companion forever. "I don't regret anything," whispered Lydia, intertwining her fingers in his hair. "Not the difficult moments, not the fear, not the uncertainty. Everything was worth it to get here. And I," he said, kissing her with a passion that hadn't diminished one bit since that first encounter on the road, "promise that you'll never have to hide or feel less than anyone in this world again. You are my queen, Lydia, and I am your servant forever." Outside the window, the Montana plains stretched infinite under the starry sky, and the wind carried the perfume of wildflowers that grew free in the immensity. Like them, who had found true love despite all obstacles, and who could now love without fear, without shame, without limitations. And when the sun rose on the horizon, painting the sky golden, it found 2 hearts that had discovered that true love not only conquers everything, but transforms everything, including 2 souls who thought themselves lost and discovered they were just waiting for each other.